Tonight, we're in the new Terminal 2 at Heathrow Airport, which opens next week. Welcome to Question Time. Good evening to you at home, to our audience here who are putting the questions to the panel, who don't know them, of course, until they hear them. On our panel, the Conservative Universities and Sciences Minister, David Willetts, Labour's Shadow Scottish Secretary, Margaret Curran, one of Ukip's newly elected MEPs, Louise Bours, the journalist, television presenter, former editor of The Mirror and the News of the World, Piers Morgan, and the man described as football's philosopher king, Barton. Our first question from Kevin Robinson, please.
Will UKIP cause another earthquake in the general election next year?
Will UKIP cause another earthquake in the general election next year? Piers Morgan.
It's been very interesting watching the rise of UKIP from America, where I've been the whole time it's been going on, because looking from the outside, my initial reaction was, like most people, probably a bunch of crackpots, this isn't going to last. And then, slowly but surely, they gathered momentum. And I tried to work out why this was happening. And I think the answer is that the British people are basically fed up with mediocrity. They look at the leaders of these three parties and they see three very similar sounding, similar looking, white, middle class, middle-aged, quite posh gentlemen who seem to have no relation to the real world. You've got Mr. Boring, you've got Mr. Weird, you've got Mr. Useless. And along comes Nigel Farage, who, for all his faults, and he's got faults, he seems like a regular guy. He is a guy you can get on a pub to. He's a guy who puts a pint on his head. And you can kind of understand why a lot of people in this country, particularly working-class people, look at him and think, yeah, he's making sense. And he's been very clever, very smart as a politician. Two issues. Focus on two things, Europe and immigration. Two issues which I think most people have concerns about. And they're right to have concerns about them. And so I think that the rise of UKIP has been a very good thing for the democratic process in this country. I think it's shaken up Westminster, it's shaken up the main parties. But there comes a point where you've got to look at them and say, if they're a protest vote, I'm all in favour. But the moment you start to take them seriously as a party that can govern, I think you've got massive problems. Because I tried to find out what else UKIP stood for, other than get out of Europe and send all the foreigners home that we don't like. And I just did a little quick check on Google, and it was
not
basically
end
gay marriage, cut all taxes, ignore climate change, and bring back handguns. And I thought, are we serious? Is this a serious party? So the question is, can there be another UKIP earthquake in a real general election? A lot will depend on the three parties and how they respond to this threat. But UKIP, and I'll be interested to hear what the lady to my left has to say, has to wake up and take itself more seriously, and has to present now policies coming on the momentum they've built up, which can actually resonate a lot more than just Europe and immigration.
And briefly, if it does that, can it cause another earthquake, or is it in with a chance?
Certainly, it's indisputable they've caused an earthquake, and I think it's a good thing. I think they've shaken things up. Can they do it again in the general election? I don't know. I mean, I think that... Do they really want to stand for more than Europe and immigration? Because I don't believe the next election will be fought on that. I think it'll be fought on the economy. Do they want to expand to that or not? I think it's an interesting situation we're in, and I congratulate Nigel Farage for coming this far, but I'm worried by what lies underneath UKIP and whether actually it sustains itself.
All right. We'll come to UKIP in a moment. Margaret Curran.
I think part of the rise of UKIP is explained by people's deep anger and resentment about what's going on in politics, but also partly what's going on in their lives. I think they saw the economic crisis. They saw, caused by bankers, but they see bankers' bonuses going. They tell you about they see the energy companies who keep saying that their prices have got to go up and our prices have got to go up, but their profits go on unchallenged. And I think people are deeply resentful of that and feel something has to be done. And, banking, following on from, MPs' expenses and such like, I think people have a deep complaint about the political system and feel politicians are not talking enough about their lives and the things that matter to them.
So
and
it's your fault that UKIP rose?
I think that
you as Labour, them as Tories?
Well, partly it's a whole political class, but I do think Labour is genuinely trying to understand and talk about the issues that affect people in this country, such as energy prices, such as the cost of living. And Ed Miliband said at the very start of his leadership campaign that this has to be about changing the way that we do politics and breaking the closed circle of politics.
OK, well, it clearly hasn't happened yet, because it didn't happen in the European elections. The question is there going to be another UKIP earthquake in under a year from now when the general election comes?
Well, who knows? It depends, actually, if we actually
Well, we're asking your view. You're a professional politician. You should know.
It depends to the scale that we respond to UKIP's, to the reasons why people voted UKIP.
Right.
I think UKIP are deeply wrong, and we need to expose why they're deeply wrong. We need to take on some of the arguments of UKIP, and I think that now needs to happen, and we need to be assertive and explain why UKIP are wrong. It is about understanding and addressing the fundamental issues in people's lives, and I think Labour does have a programme for that, and I am confident that we can answer people's needs. But we do need to make sure that we take on UKIP and expose some of the underbelly of some of the issues that they face.
What would be the one wrong thing you'd take on? You say we've got to expose where they're wrong. Where is it that they're... If you just took one thing that you could take to the election?
Well, I think this presentation that somehow all problems lie in immigration stroke Europe, and you can solve all problems just by those issues, is perhaps the thing that we need to take on. I think we need to live in a much more tolerant society. I think we need to look at what we've got in common with each other. I think that's how you address the deep malaise that is among people. You need to help people who work hard, give them a great return in life, but you don't do it by setting people apart against each other.
OK. We've got a lot of hands up, but I'd like to hear from Louise Bours, and then I'll bring in some members of the audience while we go on with the debate. Louise.
Thank you. Well, thank you to my two panellists for completely insulting and denigrating the 5.5 million people who did vote for UKIP last week. Yes, you did. You're patronising and sanctimonious.
Sorry?
The fact is...
Never been called that.
I'm sure it's only one of many things you've been called, Piers. Anyway, the fact is 5.5 million people did go out and vote for UKIP. Obviously, what the establishment cannot understand in any way is the disconnect that the normal people of this country feel with the establishment. There is a total disconnect. They look at Westminster, they look at the green leather, and they see nobody at all that represents them. Nobody who looks like them, nobody who talks like them, and so they've looked to something else. And that is why UKIP won last Thursday. The fact is, people want to see people they recognise. We want to see our representatives recognise. We want to recognise what they feel. We want to know that they're going through the kind of things that we go through on a regular basis. And that's what the political class is not doing in this country. And in fact, the political class and the establishment we are the symptom of how they have treated the people of this country. And the misinformation, like Piers has just given out, about the legalising handguns, banning gay marriage, utter nonsense. This is the misinformation.
Sorry, wait a minute.
Hang on. You've had your say.
Nigel Farage said he wanted to legalise handguns.
By the political establishment and the media in this country is incredible. What I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, you know, over the summer we will be putting together a domestic manifesto. This election has been fought on two things because it's a European election. So of course it's been fought on Europe. Of course it has. It's a European election.
Okay.
Over the summer we will have a full manifesto of domestic policies that all of you will be able to scrutinise, and so you should, and that is absolutely right.
Is it not true that Nigel Farage said he wanted to legalise handguns again in this country?
No, that's absolutely not true. What he was actually talking about was the fact that it was a disgrace that the Olympic gun team had to go outside of this country to train, and he said that was ludicrous. And I'm sorry, you're telling me that's not ludicrous?
No, that wasn't what he said.
Okay, let's leave...
It is what he said.
All right,
all right,
let's leave guns for a moment. To go to the man up there, the top left there, with spectacles and blonde hair. Yes, you, sir.
In response to Piers's first comment that all the party leaders are similar, is this not in response to our voting system? Because we've got to have someone who compromises between the 51% and the 49%, whilst party leaders such as Farage, they're a leader for about 30%. I mean, I personally would look at moving abroad if Nigel Farage was our leader next year.
And you over there. Yeah.
In my personal opinion, I think that UKIP's support will fall in the general election when people start to focus on issues which affect them. So I live in Hammersmith, and there's just been a stunning victory there from Labour in the council election because they focus on the local NHS. And I think that when people read UKIP's last manifesto, where they wanted to privatise large parts of the NHS, as a doctor who works in the NHS, I think the British public are going to reject that.
I'm sorry, that again is misinformation. Again, this is misinformation that's perpetuated by the establishment. We have never said we want to privatise the NHS. What we have said is we would like to streamline the NHS. There's 48% of people who work for the NHS who aren't clinically trained. Why aren't those resources targeted at doctors and nurses?
But we don't need
got
to
your
talk about...
manifesto in my pocket.
No, but the manifesto of 2010 is drivel, according to Nigel Farage.
Yeah.
I mean, he did actually say, I didn't read it, it was drivel, 486 pages of drivel.
This is honest.
Yeah, we needn't go into that. It's the new manifesto, I suppose, we should be concentrating on.
The thing that keeps getting me about it is that everyone's going around saying UKIP have done so well. But from what little I know about it, I don't think they've done that well. I mean, only 34% of the people voted.
Is not doing well.
Well, you've got no MPs.
Yeah, but we have...
So you can't have done that one.
But we just won a national election, Joey. We just won a national election.
Do you honestly think... Hang on, Louise.
Councillors.
Do you honestly think... I listened when you spoke. Do you honestly think that 34% of those eligible to vote cared enough about what they were voting for to make a drastic change? Because for me, they didn't.
The others didn't mobilise their vote. At least we did. We won the election.
Oh, you won the election. You won some seats in Europe, in the European Parliament, that nobody really cares about.
Well, they
because
should
nobody
care about
cared
it.
about voting for it.
Well, they should care about it.
Well, if you make the same traction, if you have the same traction in a general election, then I think people will sit up and take notice. I mean, obviously, the mainstream political parties are sitting up and take notice, but all you represent to me as UKIP is the best of a bad bunch. So if I'm somewhere and there was 4 really ugly girls, I'm thinking, well, she's not the worst, because that's all you are. That's all you are to us. That's all you are.
I have to say, the ignorance just espoused by this gentleman here, he basically fulfils the mission, doesn't he, that footballers' brains are in their feet. Well, because he's absolutely proved that to me tonight.
Well,
what
maybe
an offensive thing to say, Mr. Barton.
OK, well, maybe you do. Maybe you do. But all I'm saying is,
to frame your argument a little differently.
UKIP have not made the progress that everyone's professing for UKIP to make.
Winning a national election is not making the progress.
34% of those eligible to vote voted. Where were the other 6? So if everyone cared generally on a general election, because nobody cares, it was a protest vote. That's all it was.
All right.
Don't get too carried away with yourself.
I call it democracy, Mr.
No, all
Barton.
I call it is the Lib Dems are really bad at the minute, as everyone knows. I mean, I've got more chance of winning a general election than the Lib Dems or Nick Clegg. And the other parties have failed to perform. So UKIP come in.
That's what democracy is.
I'll give you a bit of credit for that.
That's what democracy is.
OK, the man in the spectacles in the middle there.
Whilst I agree with the general premise of what Joey is saying, not the sexist comments, the actual figures are actually 9% of all eligible voters. So it's actually even less than what you're saying. So I think it even highlights the fact that they don't actually have that much support in those that actually went to vote.
You mean the 27% support of those who voted comes out at 9% of everybody who could have voted?
Yes, exactly.
Is that significant? David Willetts.
It's 5 million people voting in a democracy. That is significant, yes. And that's messages for all of the political parties about the kind of anxieties people have. They have anxieties about Europe heading in the wrong direction. They have anxieties about migration. I actually think there's a deeper anxiety behind all that. I think they have an anxiety that our kids are not going to have the same kind of quality of life that we've enjoyed, and they expect politicians to do something to ensure that our kids do have better lives than the previous generation. So I think that's the challenge for us. I don't think UKIP are going to be able to rise to that challenge. And actually, the clue was in what Nigel Farage said on election day. He said a vote for UKIP was a free hit. He meant it was an opportunity to get a message to the government without any real consequences. Next year, people will be choosing a government. They'll be choosing who are the grown-ups who are going to do the long-term things that will ensure Britain keeps on growing, that our kids have a decent education, they have an opportunity to get on the housing ladder. And I think on those type of issues, it will be a completely different election than the one we've just had. And it's the one I look forward to when people are actually choosing the government of this country.
Why do you think UKIP can't Why do you think UKIP can't deliver that, having clearly touched a nerve in the European election?
Because if you look at their... As I say, they're touching a chord. They're touching an anxiety that I understand. And I, as a Democrat, the fact 5 million people vote is very significant. When you actually look at what the policies are, then they are completely facile. It is not the case that this nation's problems are solved simply by leaving Europe. It's actually a kind of diversion tactic. We have real challenges raising standards in our schools. We have real challenges of investing more in infrastructure. We have real challenges in ensuring that people get high-quality healthcare. Leaving Europe is not relevant for any of that. People, of course, want us to ensure Europe doesn't head in the wrong direction, and I actually think that this Prime Minister has been very effective in that. We've already vetoed a treaty. We've delivered the first cut in the European budget. They want governments that do serious things. And what Nigel Farage was offering was a kind of escape from those real tasks that real governments have to get on.
Why are you offering a referendum if it's an irrelevant issue?
No, I'm saying that there are so many other things like health or education on which essentially I doubt if any people who voted UKIP last Thursday knew what UKIP would do. And I'm not totally sure that even the Ukip MEPs exactly all agreed on what they were going to do on health or education.
Because it was a European election.
Why are you offering a referendum? Why are you making such a big deal about the referendum if you don't think it's essential to solving Britain's problems?
Because Europe is heading in the wrong direction, and because too many powers are being taken in Brussels, and because part of the frustration is absolutely that Europe is doing things that are better decided by national governments.
Okay.
And so then the choice is who will effectively negotiate and who will then give you a choice in a referendum and the outcome of that negotiations. And there is only one party that can credibly offer that at the next election, and that's the Conservatives.
The person in the fourth row, I'll come to you in a moment, Jay. The man there, you.
Is it not very worrying that so many UKIP associates and MEPs and people who represent UKIP have come out as racist or making worrying comments or homophobic?
You name me one MEP or someone who's come out as being racist. Who's come out as being racist?
What was the gay weather fiasco that, you know...
Well, he was actually a Conservative councillor, actually, but when he was a Conservative councillor spouting that nonsense, nobody ever heard about it. But as soon as it came to UKIP...
A couple of days ago, someone associated with UKIP said that all Downs children, you know, we should have forced abortion, and how can you have horrific...
I've not heard... I've certainly not seen
papers.
that. Well, I've certainly not read that.
What about David Small, or Dave Small?
Is he the Worcester councillor?
The Scroungers, Claire Balding and Elton John are perverts.
Yeah, he came out with some absolute repellent and hideous comments, and he was suspended and expelled within 3 days of expelled from the party, because we actually take notice of these things. We're not saying, we know that some of our procedures have been flawed. We're the first ones to admit that, hold our hands up, and when these people speak out, we throw them out.
But what about your own leader who goes on radio and says he doesn't want to live next to Romanians?
He didn't say that, Piers.
He did say that.
He
did say
You're
that.
twisting it and spinning it as a media man.
Okay, I'm going to go...
You are. He didn't say that at all.
Creates an atmosphere
he did not say that at all.
Of subliminal racism.
He did not say that at all.
Exactly what he said.
All right. Lisa.
I voted UKIP for the first time. Why? Because what Louise was saying, actually. Because I think for the last few years, all we've heard is talk, talk, talk. And UKIP at last are talking on behalf of the British people, or they're certainly talking to me. And as long as the major parties keep on making these noises that they are listening to us, I'm going to, well, as I say, until they actually deliver, I want to vote UKIP, because at least they give us a voice. And you know, how can I put this? It's, It just feels as though I'm being talked to like a naughty schoolboy, that my vote is a protest vote, and next year I'll be a good boy and come back into the fold and vote Conservative.
They don't understand that. By saying
Nigel
it's a
Farage
protest
who
vote,
said
they
it's
don't...
a free hit. What did he mean when he said, it's a free hit?
You know,
what did that mean?
There was a poll today conducted by ITV of people who voted UKIP at this election, and 72% of those people said they would continue to vote UKIP in 2015. Now, we know, honestly, I would not insult your intelligence. We know we've got a long way to go. We know we're flawed. As a political party, we're a baby. We've only been in existence for 21 years. And yes, our procedures and things, you know, people get through the net. But we are working really, really hard. And when those kind of things, sir, come up that you mentioned before, we kick them out, because I also think those things are repellent and odious. So please, think of where we've been, where we are now, and I tell you what, when our domestic manifesto is launched in September, then you can all scrutinise it and ask questions and make your own minds up in 2015.
You sit on the left here.
As somebody who values diversity, who supports gay marriage, who refuses to vilify people based on their nationality, their ethnicity, their religion or their race, UKIP do not and will never speak for me.
The lady over here on the right. Yes.
Yes, I thoroughly endorse what I've just heard, but what I want to say, and what I feel might answer this question about a landslide and what a party could do next year to prevent UKIP gaining any more momentum, is for Ed Miliband and the Labour Party to take a moral stand. Don't appease UKIP. Don't say that UKIP is not racist. UKIP does have, I would say,
5.5 million people are
racism,
racist in this country?
And I would like to see
this
IBM 25.
You're saying
admitted to being.
You think Labour hasn't taken on UKIP properly?
I think Labour hasn't. I think Ed Miliband should speak out against it. We are a country who can take a moral stand. We are enriched by immigration.
Absolutely.
All of us here are enriched by immigration, and I would like to see that stressed and emphasised.
I want to hear from... Hold a second. Are there anybody else here who is a UKIP supporter or voted UKIP who I'd like to hear from? Yes, at the back there. A whole row there. Did you all come together? No. You stay in the middle. Yes.
The question, I think, is that the European election that we've just had is on proportional representation. And we had effectively virtually 30% of the voting public voted for UKIP for particular reasons in a European election. We now have an ordinary by-election coming up in Newark, which is my hometown, and it will be very interesting to see whether that momentum can carry on into a conventional election on a first-past-the-post system. And I think that's the real growing up of UKIP to extend its support, not only to cover other issues, but to enable its MPs to candidates to become successful, when at the moment the UKIP support is pretty well evenly spread throughout the country, and including Wales and including Scotland, but it's not peaking in any particular place.
So Newark next week will be very interesting to see whether Newark is one of those hotspots.
The young aren't voting though. The young are disillusioned. All the new voters that came through under the Lib Dems lies about what they were going to do for them and feel let down by it have decided not to vote because they can't be bothered. They haven't voted for UKIP. Everyone who votes for UKIP or the demographic of UKIP are the older voter. You know, so obviously the fact that the 34% only turned out to the poll says there's a lot of young disillusioned voters like myself who could never imagine voting for UKIP. And the only reason that you would vote for UKIP, in my opinion, is that you were really disillusioned with the mainstream parties.
Let me go back. Two or three of you had your hands up as UKIP supporters. I'd like to hear from one other of you. Yes. The gentleman with his hand up there, yes.
Well, I'm a Labour supporter, but I voted for UKIP the last election. And I think the question is why did the 5 million people voted for UKIP?
And why did you, as a Labour supporter?
Because, I mean, you know, this is real life. I mean, what UKIP are talking about, it's happening on the street. It's not about racism, it's about the economy accepting immigrants more than what they can afford. So when people go to look for a job and they can't find it, people get angry. It's real. When people get frustrated because they can't get that housing or their kids can't get to the next school, it's real life. So when the answers like from David saying that, okay, it's a protest, we know, we're going to go and sort it out. But you're forgetting that you are the ones who actually put us in that situation in the first place. You know, so vote for UKIP. It's a real vote, and if you don't do something about it, I'm expecting to vote for UKIP again.
Right, well, when you say we've got to do something about it, I would say that the coalition, in the 4 years that we've been in government, have been sorting out a mess, and I think we have been doing things about a lot of people's worries. If you want an effective voice in Europe, so it stops keep on taking more and more powers over us, that is what David Cameron has been delivering. And I think at the next election...
But people don't, people don't believe that, do they? The whole reason, I think, why UKIP is attracting support in quite significant numbers is precisely because they don't think David Cameron has been batting for this country in Europe. And I think that's a perfectly valid charge to make.
We'll come to that in a moment.
But in which case, don't make it Europe. Take it, the decisions we took on the economy. We took some very tough decisions on the economy in 2010, 11, 12, and now the economy is great. And we have similarly taken, we have reduced the total amount of migration. We have tightened the regime for migrants coming from outside Europe. We have tightened the rules on that. You mentioned housing, sir. We have tightened the rules on housing so that people who have been living in there for a time do have priority over people who have just arrived. We've absolutely understand these are the type of legitimate anxieties people have when we're tackling them.
Did you want to come back on that, or do you agree with what David said?
Because the Tories' policy on immigration doesn't work. Because, because they cannot affect what's happening on a Euro immigration. What they're doing is they're just attacking students and people outside the EU.
You can
and it's only a tiny small number of those people.
You're absolutely right.
Sorry, I've been terribly polite, but I realise in this panel you're just going to have to talk over people. It's the only way I'm going to get to speak. But I think the lady over here made a very important point, a direct point about Labour, and I really want to take the opportunity to address this because I think it's a current in the debate. What Ed Miliband and Labour are saying is very clear. You have to make a distinction between UKIP as a party and the things they say and do, and you can't avoid responsibility in the way that you're trying to do tonight to dodge the bullets that you, in terms of some of the arguments. I think you're being, irresponsible in not actually facing up to some of the arguments about some of the things that UKIP have said and do stand for and what they try and present as politics. There's a distinction between that and why people voted for them. I don't absolutely write off those 5 million people that voted for UKIP. I will make and Labour will be out to win your votes back, those of you that are remotely sympathetic to our view of the world, because we would make a big distinction. For example, if there's a problem about housing, and we know housing and access to housing has caused tensions and difficulties in communities, we would say, don't blame the people that are applying for those houses. We need to tackle the supply of housing. I'm the daughter of an immigrant myself. I believe that immigrants have made an enormous and important contribution to this country, and we have to say that loudly and clearly. I respect anybody that comes here with enterprise and creativity and puts in hard graft. I do think they need to respond to that. But we do need to have a managed and a fair and effective system of immigration. And we need to have an honest debate about that. But I think you can do that in a progressive way and a Labour way, and not the way that the Tories have done it. And I think we need to answer people's deep concerns about politics, but also I think on their issues, we can provide answers to them. That is not stigmatising people and is not getting into the dogmas of politics.
Having a managed immigration policy is not stigmatising people.
Yes.
I'm young and I did vote UKIP. I'm actually really passionately interested in politics.
You did vote UKIP?
Yeah. The reason I voted for UKIP wasn't because of immigration, it was because I passionately believe that the UK should be a sovereign nation which shouldn't have to be part of the European United States project. We're not actually, I don't feel personally European. And if you look at everyone in the European Commission, they talk of a European dream and a European state and European armed forces. And I don't want to be part of that. But I just want to say to Joe Barton, he says young people don't vote. I actually think the reason people don't vote isn't because they're disillusioned, it's because they haven't been educated in politics. I'm one of only a very few number of people in my school who do politics. But if Mr. Willetts...
A lot of those people did vote at the last general election, though. Yeah. A lot of those people did vote because of what Lib Dems were promising.
The reason they don't vote is because they haven't been informed about politics at all.
Just answer this question, because I think we must move on to another topic. Do you think that there'll be an earthquake in the general election?
No, I don't. Because under the first past the post system, you've got absolutely no hope. UKIP
will you vote UKIP again in 11 months' time?
No, I'm going to vote to try to get Vince Cable out of Twickenham, so...
OK. Well, that's been carefully analysed, and I think I can't remember what they decided about that. Let's go on to another question. Just before we do, you can, of course, join in this debate, as you well know. Text, Twitter, hashtag BBCQT. You can follow us at BBC Question Time, and you can text comments to 83981, and the red button will tell you what others are saying. One day we hope to get Twitter onto the red button so that everybody can see Twitter, but that day has not quite yet come.
Dear.
We'll catch up with it. I know, it'd be great, wouldn't it? Ah, you're scared of it.
Obviously scared.
The comments people make. Let's take a question from Cliff Barrowman, please.
Should full details of discussions between George Bush and Tony Blair in respect of the Iraq War be made public?
This is the row that's been going on over the Chilcot report on the origins of the Iraq War and the decision, it was announced today in a letter, that they have now reached an agreement on what can and can't be published, put into the public domain. Who would like to start on this? Piers Morgan, you start on it, because you're...
Well, when I was editor of the Daily Mirror, we fought long and hard a campaign against the Iraq War. It was unsuccessful, but nothing that's happened since in Iraq has persuaded me that it was not a valid campaign, and I hoped it had been successful. And I had lots of dealings with Tony Blair at the time at Downing Street, and was into his mind a little bit about what was going on. And I always believed, my brother was fighting for the British Army in Basra, so I had a vested interest on all sides of this. And I always believed that basically Tony Blair had said to George Bush, I'm in whatever happens. And I believe when he didn't get the second UN resolution, that he had already told George Bush and the Americans were going in. And that, to me, turned our involvement in the Iraq War into an illegal involvement in the Iraq War. And I think that what you're seeing now, in terms of selective details of the conversations between the British Prime Minister and the American President, is absolutely outrageous. That we are not going to get all the details which can determine once and for all whether that agreement was made without authorisation from the British Parliament or not. And I think there's only one reason we're not getting them, and it's a bad reason. And it's because the details that are contained in those conversations would be deeply embarrassing to Tony Blair, not so embarrassing to the Americans, because I don't think they care as much as we do about it, but to the British Prime Minister Tony Blair at the time, who led us into that war, a war that I believe was illegal. I think this is fundamentally important, and we as the British public have an absolute right to see the details of those conversations.
But he said last week... He said last week, it's certainly not me who's holding it up. The sooner it's published, the better.
Well, somebody's holding it up. And Tony Blair can say that, perhaps with the safety of knowledge. I don't know. I don't think it's Tony Blair personally. Maybe he has knowledge that we don't about what has been going on behind the scenes. But I don't think there's anyone in this room or anyone watching at home who, when they heard today that we are not going to get the details of those conversations, didn't think this stinks.
Yeah. I mean, I can't understand what the point of the Chilcot inquiry is if we're not going to get the full truth. I mean, we've obviously been involved in the Hillsborough sort of campaign that was going on a while back and is still ongoing. It smells a little bit of the same about what was going on. I mean, you can't give information but say, well, we're only going to give select information. If it's going to be the truth, it has to be the whole truth, and you can't redact stuff. I mean, I've read on the way over that it's over 100 pages, you know, of direct conversations between Blair and Bush in the lead up to us going into the war. I mean, how can we... What is the point of the inquiry if they don't have this information?
I agree with Piers and Joey. I think we have you'll be glad to know. We have a fundamental right, don't we, as British people, to know what is in those papers. I mean, our men and women in the armed forces went out and fought and died because of those decisions. And I think it again highlights the disconnect between the politicians and the public. They forget that they work for us, actually. We've elected them into office, and they're public servants there on our behalf. And we have a fundamental right to know why we were taken into what I believe was an illegal war. And even I mean, I think it's really quite insulting, actually, to say that we will only get the gist, we will only get excerpts of what was talked about. I think that's absolutely disgusting.
Right. Louise, let's see what the government say about it.
Margaret Curran, Labour supporter and supporter of Tony Blair. Why do you think it's not all being published, and why has Sir John Chilcot apparently accepted that it won't all be published?
I've not seen all the details of what has actually been said today. I think I saw the word "just" being used, and it won't be everything. It'll be some excerpts from it. I think that's my understanding of what's happened. I mean, I think the principle of disclosure is important, and I think the principle of, and that's what Chilcot is actually trying to do for the British people, and broader, I suppose, more broadly. And I think some of the previous inquiries have tried to do that. The people are aware of what happened in Iraq and why we went to war, and why leaderships and governments behaved that they did. I assume that part of the explanation for not full disclosure is about secrecy and protocols of government and secret shared security protections on that basis, and that's part of the explanation. But I would have to say that Tony Blair has been through full investigation through Chilcot and through some of the other inquiries. It is obviously still a deeply important issue to Britain, and obviously, of course, to the armed services who serve so significantly for us. And I do understand the depth of feeling there still is about Iraq and the legacy of it. But I think we would need to look and see the security arguments as to why there's not full disclosure.
But it doesn't seem to be just security. For instance, there's a line in it about not attempting to explain George Bush's position, which is very curious.
Well, sure, I presume that's because the Americans have to explain their own position.
OK, what about explaining Tony Blair's position?
Well, I think that this is what has to be explained.
But if they don't quote, if you don't quote from telephone conversations, you just give the gist of a telephone conversation. You know what that means. That's what people do in ordinary life. They give the gist of something, and you don't get a real flavour of what the people were saying.
That may not necessarily be the case. I don't think you can imply from that that in any way they are misleading or deceitful. I think you would. There has to be a guarantee that it's the truth that's being exchanged, but just not the whole extent of it.
Do you not think the families of those soldiers or people who served in the war who died have the right to see why their children's lives were lost?
Of course, and they need that explanation.
So we must have full disclosure.
But that's what Chilcot is about, and I do think you're going to get the reasons why, and the basis of the conversations is going to be revealed.
We can't,
and that's important.
To protect Anglo-American relations, we can't just say, oh, well, we can't show that because it will damage this, it will be the secrecy. There's people who've lost the sons and daughters. They have the right to know why their lives were taken. OK,
you said the spectacles there and the check shirt, yes.
Your party took us against the will of the people into an illegal war. We deserve to know, the people of the world deserve to know what happened. We're not going to get it. We don't deserve to get a gist. You work for us. We deserve to know every single thing that went wrong, why we spent billions going into an illegal war that has done nothing for the world and has actually worsened our national security.
David Willetts. Well, I think that do you agree with him?
I don't believe that the war was illegal, no. But I do think there's all the key questions that people are asking about the war. And Piers I think, put a very fair and crucial question, which is what exactly was going on between Prime Minister Blair and President Bush, and what assurances or deals were being done. I think that is a crucial part of Chilcot. And we do need to know that. That is absolutely essential. And the Chilcot inquiry is an independent inquiry. It's not, and I believe that the people on that Chilcot inquiry are going to try to get to the bottom of that.
But hang on, so wait a minute, just on that point, why has he then accepted the deal that he's been offered of simply giving the gist of conversations? He's written to the Cabinet Secretary saying, I accept this is working.
I don't know what has been the details of this arrangement. My understanding
but
is
that
he
not
can
know
quote...
The details?
My understanding of what has been agreed between Chilcot and Prime Minister Blair is that there will be extracts, so that there will be real words in quotation marks, that no, not be simply the gist, but it will not be a transcript of everything that was said between Blair and Bush. And I would assume, I don't know, but I would assume that one of the issues is it what is going to happen in any future conversation between a British Prime Minister
and an overseas... It was 130 direct conversations between Bush and Blair in the build-up to the...
And I absolutely agree, and you're quite correct what you say about the parents of people who died needing to know everything about the circumstances of this war. The question is whether we can answer that question, which is absolutely right and crucial, whilst at the same time, a future American president able to say things to a British Prime Minister without his feeling that what I say in the next few years is going to appear in a transcript. Because if that, I assume, and I'm not privy to these discussions, I assume that one of the issues is what kind of conversation. When our Prime Minister is talking to President Obama next week about what they're going to try to do in Nigeria to help with the security issue of the school kids that have been abducted in Nigeria. At what point can people say this is a conversation that we're having in confidence? Now, someone has to reach that judgment. It's a difficult judgment, and I'm not privy to it, but clearly Blair and Chilcot have tried to reach some kind of agreement.
Hang on a second. When you have a war that is fought on what turns out to be an entirely false pretext, that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, I've never accused Tony Blair of lying. I think he probably did believe that Saddam had those weapons. I'm sure George Bush believed it too. But when it turned out that he demonstrably did not have them, at that point, this inquiry becomes incredibly important because the lives that Joey talked about are people who've lost them on a false pretext. The soldiers, including my brother, who went on the front line and risked their lives and in some cases gave their lives, they are doing it then for the wrong reasons. And that's why this transcript could clear up whether Tony Blair, the British Prime Minister, gave assurances which he did not share with the British people or with the British Parliament. And if you don't reveal them, everyone's going to assume that is what's on them.
And just to pick up on one point, David, you say that it was an agreement made with Tony Blair, but actually the letter Chilcot has written is written to the present Cabinet Secretary,
and he is
Hayward, and
he has responsibility. He is not a party figure. He has responsibility for the crucial question, which shouldn't be decided by any politician, which is, are there any conversations that a British Prime Minister can have with the President of the US that the President of the US should be able to think that text is not going to be revealed.
And we should never know the answer to
the
that.
challenge is whether Chilcot can answer the crucial questions which Joey and Piers and others are putting. They're absolutely reasonable questions. They're absolutely the crucial questions. Whether he can answer those questions by he and his independent members of his inquiry looking at everything that was said between Bush and Blair, insofar as we have any record on it anywhere in Whitehall. But whether that all then, and this is what Jeremy Hayward and Chilcot have to decide, whether all that should be word by word publicly
Let
available.
me hear from a couple of members of the audience. We'll go on to another question. You say over there on the right. The man with the beard. No, with the other beard.
Must be me.
Not your beard, his beard.
I think Piers, for the second time with me, has hit the nail on the head. And I think the reason we're not going to get the full conversations, the fully redacted versions, become public is because, number one, we'll actually find out the reasons we went to war, and number two, and I think this is the crucial thing, the public will realise that the national interest is not synonymous with the public interest. They will realise that the national interest, whenever the establishment talks about the national interest, it's from establishment to establishment, about protecting those people, you know, the highest end of power in Whitehall, and it's not about the public interest, because how could anybody argue that fully publishing in full these conversations is not in the public interest? And it also shows one more thing, that why are we not talking about declassifying the conversations between the Joint Intelligence Committee over here and the Director of National Intelligence in the US? Because it shows, as Piers rightly said, the intelligence was proved false, the dodgy dossier. It shows that the decision was taken at the top, and it was between two people who had a phone conversation where one probably said to the other, "I'm with you all the way, pal," and that's the reason.
But you will get them, but they'll just be 30 years. It'll just be however long it takes to get it. I mean, for me, the key thing is, obviously, when Blair said after 9/11, we stand by the shoulders of our brothers, or whatever the words were to that effect. And I would like to see if it's Blair following through on that, to say, well, we said we'd stand by you, and obviously, you know, the Americans using the premise of the 9/11 attacks to go and do what they want with their ridiculous foreign policy. And whether Blair has actually tried to talk Bush out of it, whether Blair has actually agreed with him. I mean, I'd just like to see that, because people have lost their lives. I want to know why they've lost their lives.
The woman there on the left, in green.
I wonder if there's this is sort of tapping into the disconnect that people feel with their parties, that there's a kind of a quid pro quo that needs to happen if our phone calls and our emails and our communication is going to be tapped at will, then surely that transparency should work both ways. We're in an age of Big Brother, that should work both ways. And the second point I want to make is Joey Barton. I was with you on some of the things you said. I think the analogy you made of 4 ugly girls, that's going to be on Twitter. For tonight and tomorrow, you'll be buried for it.
All right, well, there's lots, but I do apologise. I couldn't think of a better one. I mean, this is the first time I've ever done it. As Louise rightly pointed out, my brains are in my feet, which is an equally
I think I could see on your face
statement.
you realise what you said, but it will
Yeah,
carry.
maybe I was a little bit nervous. I apologise. That's all I can...
OK, let's leave the mea culpa and go on to another question. Melissa Hughes.
Should Heathrow Airport have a 3rd runway?
Should Heathrow Airport... Now, we can't fail to do this. Here we are sitting in Heathrow, and the great debate about whether there should be a 3rd runway, an extended runway, Gatwick runway. Governments don't seem to be able to make up their minds. There's a report that's not going to be decided on until safely after the next general election. Joey Barton, without bringing in 4 girls, what's your view?
I'm never going to live that down, am I?
No, you aren't.
I just added to the repertoire. Well, I'm a little bit biased in this, in terms of I live on the flight path over a queue. So I'm dead against Heathrow having a 3rd runway. And, I mean, am I right in thinking the last three parties at the general election had in the manifesto that they were going to be against the 3rd runway? I mean, from what little I've seen about it, or what little I know about it, I've seen the Gatwick proposal, the Heathwick proposal. You know, travel on the tube and seeing that Gatwick or wanting to expand. You know, as somebody who lives on the flight path, I'm dead set against it. I'm surmising most of the people who live in and around Heathrow don't want the extra traffic, don't want the extra pollution. I mean, unless...
So somebody else should have it. It's a NIMBY argument.
Gatwick, I mean, you know, they were talking about making this Heathwick and making it a terminal and putting a high-speed...
But people live around Gatwick too, and they have houses and homes, and there's noise.
Yeah, but they seem to want it. I mean, has anyone done any research to find out whether they want it? I mean, I know Heathrow people, or certainly people in this region, are against it. I mean, what I don't understand is why the other parties on the manifesto were against it, and what's changed, you know, have we got silent planes, is there less pollution? What's changed now to the next election?
The one up there in the second row from the back.
I think they should have a 3rd runway. It's more economical than HS2. Provide more jobs, bring in international jobs. It would be a lot better for the UK as a whole.
Are you all live at one way or another live fairly close to Heathrow? So are you in favour of it?
Yeah, I'm in favour of Heathrow, and I'm also in favour of Gatwick. I think since Gatwick has sort of been the nationalisation was taken off, I think Gatwick should be given a chance to compete for being a global hub. And I know that they've got restrictions till 2018, but their local council is actually in favour of it. I've done some research at UCL as part of my project management course, and a lot of the debate was that definitely Heathrow does need another runway because of the capacity is at maximum. But also, I think Gatwick, they've got a new CEO who's also been renovated City of London at Edinburgh, and I think he should be given a chance to sort of give Gatwick another runway.
What's UKIP's policy on it, Louise Bours?
Well, I have to admit to having a bit of a north-south divide on this one, I'm afraid, because I represent the north-west, and it's a bit like when we had the lead story on the news about the tube strikes. It's really kind of, well, we really don't care if you've got a tube strike in London. It doesn't really affect us in Manchester. And it's kind of a bit like this with the Heathrow runway. But the capacity point, sir, I was reading a little bit about that. And as far as I can see, capacity, you talk about capacity, that's going to create more demand. Now, they had a really good example of that was in Frankfurt in 1984. They had the same kind of problems, and they built the 3rd runway. Now, 2 years ago, they've now built a 4th runway. So if you increase capacity, you will increase demand, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And, you know, we talked, the lady mentioned HS2. You know, this is meant to be disperse economic activity across the country. Well, Heathrow, you get another runway, it's going to, again, suck everything into London. And you know what? There's lots of things going on outside of the M25. I know it's really incredible, but we have flushing toilets, and we have running water in the northwest, and Manchester's a great city. city and Liverpool's a great city, and I would like to see, come on, let's see some of that economic activity diverted to other areas. But picking up on what Joey said, you know, I believe passionately, UKIP believe passionately that the people should have a say, and it's you that's going to be affected, the people who live in this area. And so it's absolutely vital that you are consulted, and you have to have that through a local referenda. And if the people who are here, who are affected in London, don't want it, it shouldn't happen.
Piers Morgan.
Job creation where?
You know what?
All over the country.
This seems to me a classic British debate that we're now having, which is we're finding endless excuses not to do something which I think is absolutely overwhelmingly in our interest to do. Heathrow is the #1 aviation brand that we have in this country. America, where I live most of the time, they love Heathrow. They don't talk about Gatwick. It doesn't have the same prestige, and I don't think against Gatwick, but Heathrow is our blue-ribboned airport, if you like. We need the capacity. We want to encourage the people who are going to be flooding in from China, from America, from other countries, the Far East predominantly. They're going to come in, and they're going to come from their own airports, which are sensational. You know, I've been to Shanghai, I've been to many parts of the Far East and the Middle East. Their airports are way ahead of most of ours. However, go to Terminal 5 here at Heathrow, a fantastic terminal. Recently voted one of the best terminals in the world. I've used it all the time. It's tremendous. This terminal here, Terminal 2, about to open, is modelled on Terminal 5. It looks fantastic. We should be proud of this. And we should say, right, we have something special here. We are redeveloping Heathrow to become a genuinely world-class airport. Let's give them a third runway. Let's become not just one of the best airports in the world, let's become the best. And let's not be British about it and say, oh, it's noisy. Oh, the traffic's going to be bad. Oh, the pollution.
Joey?
Piers.
Let's be the best.
But Piers, you know, if you travel in Heathrow or in
and I live under the path too.
But
it will go over my head.
But you lived in New York.
Yeah.
Well, at the moment, I'm back here for reasons which are slightly beyond my control. But, I mean, the point is I have a house that's going to be on the flight path too. That's not the point. I mean, the 747, so you know, when it was introduced, was the noisiest aircraft in the world. It's now one of the quietest. Right? You've got to work out these planes are getting quieter.
When you say, what do you mean by quietest? Because we were
planes are getting quieter, Joey.
Yeah, but not that quiet.
Technology will mean they will continue to get quieter. Do not let noise and pollution and traffic stop us building a world-class airport that makes us see. Well, you know what? Build another one in Manchester and Birmingham and anywhere else you want to build one. I don't see you begging to do it.
All right.
And one in... let these people decide.
All right, and one in Glasgow, Margaret Curran.
And I, of course, have to tell you how wonderful Glasgow is.
Yeah, but you don't have to do that.
Fantastic.
Build one in Glasgow! Build one everywhere!
Yes.
Of course. What the trick in this and the difficulty in this is you have to balance out economic development, and I think Piers has made that argument very strongly. You can't always dole things out because a certain group of people don't want them, but we also, as a country and across the globe, have to take account of aviation emissions too. That is a challenge. So I think it's right, believe it or not, what the government have done through the Davis Commission. It is the proper way to come to this conclusion is to look at evidence-led policy, where we look at the different arguments and you try to come to a conclusion that allows you, hopefully, to look at noise pollution and such like, but also look if we can do something about CO2 emissions. But I wouldn't want to be in a position where we're undercutting developments in the South East, and that's not an argument against developments elsewhere in the rest of the country.
Okay.
Because I do think point-to-point air travel and our airports across Scotland and Britain are equally important.
David Willetts, if you can answer very briefly, because I want to get in one more question before we end.
But of course, this is absolutely a political challenge. We've got Joey giving one sort of passionate arguments and Piers giving the opposite argument equally passionately. And that's why I do think having an outside independent expert, Howard Davis, who is looking through the options, is going to assess all these arguments we're hearing about noise or pollution or global hubs. It's best to give him the objective analysis and look forward to his report. That's the only way we're ever going to resolve this.
Look, I live on the flight path. It's noisy, mate. It is. Maybe they'll get quieter, but it is noisy. Anyone who lives on it will testify to it. You hear them going over. All right. The thing that strikes me about it is the expanding Gatwick theory, you know, and you can, they were talking about putting the 15 minutes or 20 minutes high-speed link between the two, so then Gatwick, it essentially becomes Heathwick.
But Joey,
and you
Gatwick
have
is not
Gatwick
in,
as a
Gatwick's
terminal.
not in London. London is our capital city. It should be the pride of the country, and it should be the one that we work hardest to make the best.
I'm going to bow to Louise Bours that not everybody is obsessed by where the Heathrow has its extra runway, because not everybody lives here. I'm going to take a question, if we can just do it in a few minutes, from Robert Benjamin, please. Mr. Benjamin.
Yes. Are NHS-funded slimming clubs really the best way towards a healthier nation?
This is a kind of big story. You're a nutritionist, aren't you?
Yes, that's
correct. Do you think they are or not? I mean, this is the idea that the National Health will pay for you to go to Weight Watchers and lose weight. You in favour of that or not?
I think it's a nice idea, but I fear it's not preventative enough. Obesity is a very big problem. And UK girls, for example, just rank 3rd in Europe as the heaviest. And these girls...
Oh, it's one for Joe Barton, this one. The heaviest girls in Europe. The 3rd heaviest girls, is that right?
That was the first.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Joe Barton, are you in favour of... You're a health freak.
Am I?
I thought you were.
I'm struggling to see how the NHS or we should subsidise it. I really am. I mean, I've written before about sort of the carrot and stick argument, you know, about introducing a fat tax. I think, you know, people obviously are aware of the kind of things they're putting in the mouth. The thing that gets me, I think, and this may be where the government can help, is I know a lot of people who are low-income families, you know, and they would really like to eat healthily, eat organic, but it's very, very expensive. And the alternative for them is they've got to feed the kids, and the stuff that's really cheap is the stuff that's pretty crap. I mean, if the government could introduce something where maybe, you know, people on low income or benefits can receive a coupon or a token or something that allows them to get fresh vegetables, fresh fruit and veg, and give the kids a healthy diet, then I think that'd be a good thing.
OK. I'm told we only have a minute left, so...
Yeah, I mean, you know, £5 billion every single year is the NHS spends on obesity-related illnesses, and I think if someone is willing to make the effort to try, and I believe things like Weight Watchers and Slimming World, they do try to change how you look at food, how you cook food, etc. I'm sure that's got to be cheaper than spending £5 billion on gastric bans and type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. So why not look at the alternatives? Yeah.
It's a good idea, but I think you've got to take this further. Why are so many girls in particular, but the boys' figures weren't much better, so obese in this country compared to other European countries? And the answer, I think, is we've become a very sedentary country.
Yes.
You know, our kids, my 4 kids love their sport, for example, and they play it all the time, and it keeps their weight down. They're all pretty trim. But I see lots of other kids who don't get sport at schools. I've tried to bang this drum for a long time. I would personally, the one thing I've agreed with Boris Johnson about more than anything else, bring in 90 minutes or 2 hours of compulsory sport at school.
Right,
precisely for one reason. They're all on their laptops and phones all day. Get them running and losing weight.
David Willetts, you have to be... David Willetts.
We do have an obesity problem. It is very
yes or
serious.
no.
I don't want the fussy kind of intervention that's being proposed. I agree with Piers, and we have actually added an extra hour of sport across all our schools because people do need more exercise. And the good news is, after the Olympics, we are actually doing more sport.
But you're in favour of the NHS putting slimming clubs?
No, I think that, well,
against
it's a decision for individual local authorities. I'm not at all convinced that's a good use of NHS funding.
Okay.
No, I think the exercise is the right way.
Margaret Curran?
We need a long-term solution to this. Whether that would actually be a long-term solution, I don't know. But I do think we need to get people into looking at food. I think the world has changed in this, how you eat for the long term, not just in some of the short-term fads, which some of the slimming clubs are guilty of. But if I can just agree with Louise on this, if it helps you think about food, then that's good. And it's not just young people. I think all of us actually need to sign up for this, and maybe we can show by example about some of the way that we behave.
Did you point at me there as an example of fine physical fitness? Very kind. What a perfect way to end the show.
I don't mean just sporting and how you talk about children. I think we all have to wise up and show by example.
I think you should have a look.
We're all guilty.
I think you should have a look at what they did in Dubai.
What are they doing in Dubai?
In Dubai, they gave a gram of gold for every kilogram of weight lost. And they spent £400,000.
Something for the UKIP manifesto.
Something for the manifesto. And what's more, you can yo-yo and you get a gram every other year.
I'll sign up for that one then.
That's it. That's it. Next week, Question Time is going to be in Llandudno in Wales, and the following week we're going to be in King's Lynn. If you want to come either to Llandudno or King's Lynn, the website is there on our screen, or you can call the number 0330 123 99 88. If you're listening on 5 Live, you know the debate goes on Question Time Extra Time. But my thanks to our panel here, to all of you who came to take part in this programme in this brand new Terminal 2. Until next Thursday from Question Time, good night.
One man who can't forget, the other who can't forgive. Jack Nicholson is out for revenge next on BBC One in our film The Crossing Guard.